Sup, fuckers? Hello, people of the internet. I'm Eclipse, and welcome back to Dead Series. Another My Pride video. I've gotten many requests to do another video on my AUs, so I'm deciding to go the dark route and move from Ode to the Loners to the madness of Feathermane. It's as bad as it sounds, so this is the only warning you'll get. This shit gets dark real fast. So only stick around if you can handle very intense angst. I'll make the next one wholesome, I swear. Also, considering making art is hard, and most of my last visual content on an AU was hot garbage, I'm taking a different approach visually to this AU video in particular. Let me know what you think of this approach. Well, without further ado, here we go. The sun set on another day as Feather walked through the unforgiving stretch. He was fully grown now. That's how long it had been since beginning this trek on his own. Alone. He just had to remember, which way had they gone to get here before? He walked up to a mud puddle to take a much-needed drink as another no-mane approached. This strange large male was not quite as large as Feather was. And from the tension in the air, Feather knew this wouldn't end well. He sat and took his drink as the other male stared. The puddle wasn't big, but it wasn't puny either. They'd both get a fair share if the other no-mane kept his head on straight. And there it was. The slight quickened heart rate and the shuffling of a big cat making a choice to throw his life away. The other no-mane pounced, but Feather saw it coming a mile away and easily dodged, turning and biting at the neck of the other male while pinning him down. Oh, how fast the expression of fierce anger turned into humbled fear as the smaller male looked up at Feather, pleading. In any other part of the stretch, with any other two males, this would be the end of the quarrel. The winner would let the other up, and they'd both drink like gentlemen, one having learned a lesson, and the other a little patience. But not here. That's not how Feather did things anymore. He quickly immobilized the other and dug his teeth into his neck, ending his life swiftly. He then returned to his puddle to finish his drink. After a few more days of traveling, and several nights without sleeping, things were finally starting to look familiar to Feather. Finally, after Suns knows how much time, he was there. He recognized scents, bits of grass, and trees, but especially a watering hole. Memories came flooding back as tears pricked his eyes. No, not now. He would have time for that later. Stealing his emotions again, he entered the territory further and carefully approached what he only remembered as home. He could hear the voice of the lion who had taken his family away from him, the one that had taken everything. Feather was different now. He was strong. Proudmane addressed his lionesses just like he would any other day. Silent Stalk, Far Leap, Long Run, Water Hunter, and Power Strike. All his. Counting the ones in Silent Stalk's body, along with Water Hunter's currently unnamed daughters, he could truly say his pride was thriving. Proudmane began giving the daily announcements, checking off all the marks, when he spotted a ballsy no-mane approaching the very center of the territory where the whole pride was sat at the sister step. He interrupted himself mid-sentence to snarl at the unwelcomed visitor. It took the older mane a second to even realize what he was facing. There was no introduction, no clarification, no explanation. Feather just leapt at the lion who had killed his family. It hit Proudmane a second too late, who was challenging him. By the time it did hit him, Feather was already overpowering him. Months. No. Years on the stretch had hardened his body and resolve to the point of being near unrecognizable. Proudmane felt like he had been dropped into a deep, dark pool as all the memories flooded back. The brat from Water Hunter's litter that he had never found, the pathetic, cursed lioness he had let live, regret, anger, dread. He let all emotion leave him. It didn't matter anymore. And just like that, Proudmane was dead. But the fire in Feather's heart remained, flaring, chipping away at him, and growing more irritated. Proudmane wasn't the only one who had to pay. He quickly approached Water Hunter and her cubs. The cubs were older than his sisters were when they were killed, but still weak enough and young enough to be deemed cubs. Despite his mother staring at him pleadingly, all Feather saw when looking at his mother was the fact that she mated with the mane that had taken everything away from him. Without even looking at his step-siblings, he crushed them under his paws. Water Hunter was hysterical, which only angered her son more, as he knew she wouldn't stop him from killing them, nor had she kept Proudmane from killing his sisters. He couldn't forgive her for that. He wouldn't. Power Strike screeched in terror as Feather dispatched his mother without a sliver of remorse, slitting her throat with his claws. However, always being the first to come to her senses, the weathered Hunts Chief quickly commanded the rest of the Pride to attack Feather, as he was never going to be their new mane. Farleap, ever blinded by the temptation of approval and praise, leapt to her guaranteed grave as Long Run hid. The former Prideless knew that if this was going to be the new reality, with this mane attacking them, she would rather starve on the stretch again, but knew if she just ran, she'd make herself a target. So she hid. Silent Stalk was in no place to fight, heavily pregnant with Proudmane's second litter of cubs. Feather utterly ignored Farleap's pathetic attempt at fighting him, and instead ran after Silent Stalk, whose rounded belly made it impossible for her to hide like Long Run did. Seeing the chance to cut off Proudmane's bloodline permanently, Feather plunged his claws into Silent Stalk's body, ensuring not only her death, but the death of the cubs as well. All the positive memories that he had had of Silent Stalk encouraging him, and all the times they had had fun together, it didn't matter anymore. He then turned and directed his hatred at Farleap. She, too, needed to pay. Despite her fear, Farleap leapt with the confidence of a Hunts Chief at a lion twice her size. Within seconds, it was just Power Strike and Feathermane in the clearing, with a shaken Long Run watching from a safe distance. Feathermane's rage increased as he approached the Hunts Chief. He wouldn't kill her now. Oh no, that would be too quick, too merciful of a death for her. She needed to pay. Out of all of them, she needed to pay the most. He commanded her to begin walking, closely trailing behind. He did not remember anyone else needing to pay, so he left the Pride territory with Power Strike into the stretch, not allowing her out of his sight. Long Run knew she could stay and have all of the spoils of Pride territory to herself if she wanted. But she just vaguely remembered who Feather originally was. Drifting for years in a mundane life without her lover, Hover had forgotten who she was, let alone Feather or nothing. Despite her fear, she decided to trail the two of them, knowing that no life worth living was behind her but in front of her, into the stretch, always keeping a safe distance. Feathermane was too keen on Power Strike staying in line to even notice. All of his attention and hatred was hyper-focused on the Hunts Chief. This went on for days to weeks, until finally, a good month or two had gone by, with Hover being forced to catch up to Feathermane's insane pace by walking through many nights. Powerstrike was showing signs of fatigue and high stress at this point, being forced to keep pace with the monster that just killed her whole family. Feathermane only allowed her to eat enough of what they found to live another day. He wasn't keeping her alive, no. He was merely prolonging her death. Not yet. As they both approached what only Feathermane knew was the end, his pace slowed. For at least a second, all of his anger melted away, and all the pain he had repressed through the years shot up into his chest and head. But he couldn't falter. No, 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 not now. He had stayed strong since the start. He wasn't giving in now. Not when he was so close to just finishing it. He took a deep breath and led Powerstrike around the corner of a high dune. Powerstrike felt her blood run cold as something came into view from behind the sandy ridge. She quickly tried to look away from the sight that was revealed, immediately knowing what it was. But Feathermane roared boldly and grabbed her head with his paw, squeezing the skin above her eyes to keep them open, and forced her head to turn back to the horrific sight. Even after years of decay and heat, some skin and fur were still left behind, making the identity of the body undeniable. The skeletal remains of what Powerstrike called nothing. Now the tears were spilling, from Powerstrike and Feathermane as he continued to hold her head in place, with her eyes peeled open to stare at what she had done. After refusing to talk a word other than commands since beginning the trip back out to the stretch, Feather uttered the last words he ever would to Powerstrike.
This is the last thing you'll see.
Without warning, his claws from the paw holding her head in place dug into Powerstrike's eyes, blinding her with only the after-images of Nothing's corpse to accompany her mind. Feathermane finally let Powerstrike go as she fled hopelessly into the sandy wasteland, crying out in physical pain and the mental and emotional anguish that came with the vision that she could not get out of her head. The limp, half-decayed corpse of her daughter, the one that had pleaded for help, the one that had disappeared, secretly suffering with Feather on the stretch for so long because of the actions of others, including her. The one that Powerstrike loved so much, yet treated so poorly, torn to shreds before her eyes. She only had herself to blame as she continued to run in every which direction, as if placing distance from her and her daughter would somehow get the pictures of her tortured corpse out of her head. Hover didn't even need to track Feathermane's scent. Powerstrike's incoherent screeching and sobbing led her right to where she assumed Feathermane was killing her, but no. Powerstrike was running, with blood waterfalling down her face from her eyes, away from a high dune that she could barely make out Feather's frame sitting on. He was facing away from her. He was no longer interested in Powerstrike, it seemed. She approached carefully, knowing if she had the element of surprise, she might be able to outwit him, but was mostly curious as to why she heard a second voice sobbing. Now it was here. Now was the time. It was over. He could let go now. The fear, the agony, the loneliness, all coming back. Feather stooped over Nothing, letting the tears and crippling feelings overpower him at last. Everyone had paid the piper, including him. His punishment was now commencing as he choked on the bodily fluids spilling out of his eyes, nose, and mouth from the sheer amount of grief. Years ago, he had done the same thing in this exact spot. All that time, Feather had called out to the dusty void for help because he knew his best friend was dying. Not of sickness or of starvation, but of a broken heart. No one ever came. Not the strange white lion that had confronted them at the watering hole, nor any part of the pride or prideless. No one. Nothing wouldn't move. She wouldn't talk, wouldn't drink when Feather brought her soaked moss, nor would she eat the things he managed to catch. It's like she just decided to stop trying. Feather was certain they'd make it if they kept going, but no amount of begging, crying, or yelling would convince her. She would only acknowledge his existence by looking at him when he begged. But other than that, it was like she was already dead. On the day she finally did die from the malnutrition, something broke in Feather. For a while, a couple days at least, he just went about his business as usual, bringing back food and yelling at her to eat, pretending that her eyes were open, looking at him and giving him proof that he wasn't alone. That only lasted so long. When the environment started taking her body and the stench got too strong to deny, Feather cried his heart out at the top of the dune, begging for help, for guidance, for accompaniment. Suns, Kansu, Azra, anybody. But nobody came. He even got desperate enough to pretend the prey he caught were his friends. They were just sleeping. He wasn't alone. They were there with him. His hunger inevitably led to these friends disappearing, but they would come back. He wasn't alone. He wasn't alone. He never let the dune out of his sight during this time, getting by and surviving while stuck in a world of fantasy to keep his mind intact. However, time came when he could no longer deny how he was all alone now. Nothing was gone. His family slaughtered in the name of pride law. Feather's fragile heart and mind floated between numbness and rage as they broke over and over again. His whole being was eating itself alive. After being tortured this way by the goddesses, Feather decided to collect the debts of those that he knew did wrong. That was the only way. If he had to be alone like this, with the constant inner quarrel of a broken mind and heart, then he wouldn't let them get away with all they had done to make him this way. All the suffering nothing had endured, all the suffering he had endured, he would make them all pay. But now, here he was again, sobbing over his best friend's corpse. It was like not a thing had changed. It was like he never left, crying over her for all these years. The pain in his heart and in his head just wouldn't stop. He knew this would be the outcome if he sought revenge, and that there would be no way out of it. But even so, he couldn't help but wish for it all to just end. As Hover crept up behind him and saw the face of her lover attached to a dead body, she felt her blood run cold. Immediately she understood, and she empathized with why Feather did it. But she knew that wasn't what Nothing would have wanted, even if she had given up. Feather got his wish for eternal rest when Hover sank her teeth into the back of his neck, not letting go until he was completely motionless. Remembering what the pride had taught her, Hover roared to the skies for Azura's forgiveness and asking that the moon goddess accept and protect the souls of the only 2 lions she ever really cared for laying next to her. But if she had to guess, she doubted there were goddesses watching over them at all. So yeah, that was Madness of Feathermane, a turn for the worst case scenario. And yeah, I'm going to be putting out more of these videos soon, so let me know what you would like to see. I've made other AUs, some based around Hover, others based around Farleap, and some where the world is a little bit funky. Also, quick announcement. I have commissions open now, so yay! If you guys want me to draw you something, then click on the links down below. Thank you, and I'll see you on the other side.